Narcissist isn't always the loud, obvious villain people imagine. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's convincing, and sometimes the most unsettling moment is when you stop asking, what if they were the narcissist? And start wondering, what if some of it is me? That question alone already separates self-awareness from true narcissism, but it doesn't mean there's nothing to look at. Psychology doesn't divide people into heroes and monsters. It looks at patterns, and some narcissistic patterns can exist without someone being fully narcissistic. One of the first things worth paying attention to is how you react to criticism, not on the surface, but internally. If feedback, even calm, reasonable feedback, immediately feels like an attack, your nervous system might be protecting something fragile. Narcissistic traits are often less about ego and more about defense. When your sense of self feels unstable, criticism doesn't feel like information. It feels like danger. So instead of curiosity, the reflex is justification, explanation, or turning the focus back onto the other person. Another subtle sign is when empathy quietly shuts down the moment accountability enters the room. You might genuinely care about others' feelings until those feelings imply that you caused harm. At that point, empathy gets replaced with self-protection. The mind starts racing to defend intent instead of acknowledging impact. From a psychological perspective, this isn't cruelty, it's avoidance of shame. But the effect on others is the same. They feel unseen. There's also a pattern where identity becomes tightly linked to being misunderstood or wronged. Pain becomes central to how you see yourself. You may not exaggerate your experiences, but there's an internal hierarchy where your suffering always feels more urgent, more complex, more important. When someone else expresses hurt, it can feel strangely invalidating, not because you lack empathy, but because it threatens the story you're holding about yourself. Control can be another hidden marker, especially when it's disguised as care. It doesn't look like domination, it looks like constant advice, correcting people's emotions, explaining what they really feel, steering conversations back to your perspective because it feels safer there. Psychologically, control often grows out of anxiety, not malice, but when someone's autonomy makes you uncomfortable, that discomfort is information. Another area to look at is how conflict ends. If disagreements rarely resolve with mutual understanding and instead end with emotional exhaustion, guilt, or the other person backing down, that dynamic matters. Narcissistic patterns often resolve tension by overpowering rather than repairing, not necessarily through anger, sometimes through logic, emotional intensity, or moral superiority. There's also the question of how you experience boundaries. Healthy boundaries feel neutral. Narcissistic traits often experience boundaries as rejection. When someone pulls back, needs space, or says no, the reaction isn't disappointment. It's panic, resentment, or a need to reassert connection on your terms. From a nervous system perspective, boundaries can feel like abandonment when attachment is insecure. One of the hardest signs to face is how much energy goes into protecting your self-image. If being a good person, the reasonable one, or the emotionally aware one feels essential to survival, any crack in that image can feel unbearable. True narcissism can't tolerate self-reflection, but narcissistic traits can show up as selective reflection, looking inward only as long as it doesn't destabilize who you believe you are. Here's the most important distinction. People with entrenched narcissistic personality structures don't sit with discomfort like this. They don't question themselves in good faith. They don't feel uneasy watching a video like this. Self-inquiry itself is a protective factor. Psychology isn't about labeling yourself as the problem. It is about understanding where certain patterns come from and whether they re-protecting you or hurting you. Many narcissistic traits are learned adaptations, responses to environments where safety, validation, or emotional attunement were inconsistent. The goal isn't to decide whether you are a narcissist. The goal is to notice where defensiveness overrides curiosity, where control replaces connection, where self-protection Silence is empathy. Those patterns aren't a life sentence, they're signals. And awareness, real awareness, is where change actually begins.